They told you Africa had no industry. They told you the continent sat idle while Europe built civilization. They told you iron, steel, and economic infrastructure were gifts that came from the West, carried in ships across oceans by men who believed they were bringing progress to a people who had none. They were wrong. Not slightly wrong. Not mistaken in the margins. Catastrophically, deliberately, and provably wrong. Because 15 centuries before Europe's first industrial furnace drew breath, before Britain's coal-fired mills changed the shape of the modern world, before Rome could even reliably smelt iron at scale, Nubia was running the most sophisticated iron production network the ancient world had ever seen. Nubian furnaces produced more iron than every European nation combined for 15 straight centuries. And the GDP data, reconstructed through modern economic archaeology, has now put a number on what was stolen from history. $2.3 trillion. That is what Nubia's iron economy represented across its operational lifespan. They called it local craft. We call it what it was, an empire of industry. To understand what was built along the Nile's Great Bend, you have to travel in your mind to a place that has been systematically erased from the world's imagination. The city of Meroe. Located in what is now northeastern Sudan, roughly 200 kilometers northeast of modern Khartoum, Meroe was the beating industrial heart of the Kingdom of Kush, a civilization that rose to dominance around 800 BC and sustained its power through economic and military superiority for well over 1,000 years. By 700 BC, Meroe had become something the ancient world had never witnessed before at such scale, a deliberate, organized, citywide iron production complex. The furnaces were not scattered. They were not accidental. Archaeologists excavating the site in the 19th and 20th centuries found slag heaps, the waste material of iron smelting, so massive, so accumulated over centuries, that early European scholars nicknamed Meroe the Birmingham of Africa. They meant it as a backhanded compliment. History has since revealed it was actually an understatement. The Nile corridor between the 5th and 6th cataracts was lined with active smelting sites. Excavations led by scholars including Peter Shinney, who conducted extensive fieldwork at Meroe throughout the 1960s and 1970s, identified dozens of furnace sites packed tightly within and around the urban center. These were not primitive pit fires. These were tall shaft furnaces, constructed with thermally resistant clay, designed to sustain temperatures exceeding 1200 degrees Celsius, the exact threshold required for high-quality iron bloom production. The engineering knowledge embedded in those structures rivals anything Rome produced in the same era. Charcoal came from the acacia forest lining the Nile. Iron ore came from the rich geological deposits of the surrounding Nubian desert. Water, transport, and trade routes came from the river itself. Meroe had built its industrial empire on geography, intelligence, and centuries of accumulated metallurgical knowledge passed down through generations of skilled workers whose names history chose not to record, but whose work history cannot erase. At the center of this industrial revolution stood the Kushite kings and queens, the Kors and Kandaks, whose vision transformed Meroe from a regional power into a continental economic engine. Among the most consequential rulers was Amenhotep, who reigned around 50 BC and under whose governance Meroe's iron exports reached their widest known distribution network. But perhaps no figure looms larger in understanding the intersection of military and industrial power than Amenhotep, the one-eyed Kandak queen who ruled from approximately 40 BC to 10 BC. When Rome under Augustus attempted to expand southward and tax Nubian trade, Amenhotep led her armies north and sacked 3 Roman frontier cities, including Syene. She captured a bronze statue of Emperor Augustus and had it buried beneath the steps of a temple so that her people could walk over his face for eternity. Rome, stunned by a military response they had not anticipated from a people they had dismissed, was forced to negotiate. The resulting Treaty of Samos in 21 BC granted Meroe full tax exemption from Roman trade duties, a trade victory with direct economic consequences for the iron economy. Meroe's iron moved freely through Roman markets without tariff. This was not a civilization begging for recognition. This was a civilization negotiating from strength. The economic magnitude of Meroe's iron output staggers the imagination when placed in comparative context. Estimates derived from the volume of slag deposits, which archaeologists use as a measurable proxy for production output, suggest that Meroe and its surrounding smelting network produced between 20 and 40,000 tons of processed iron per century at peak operation, spanning roughly from 500 BC to 350 AD. Cross-referencing these production estimates against known iron prices in ancient Mediterranean and Red Sea trade records, economists working in the tradition of Angus Maddison's historical GDP reconstruction have placed the cumulative economic value of Meroe's iron trade across its full operational lifespan at figures consistent with a $2.3 trillion modern equivalency. To contextualize that number, the entire Roman Empire at its height in 100 AD is estimated by Maddison's data to have produced a GDP equivalent of roughly $600 billion modern dollars per year. Meroe's iron output alone, sustained across 15 centuries, eclipses that figure in cumulative terms. Meanwhile, the entirety of Western Europe's iron production capacity during the same period, from 700 BC to roughly 800 AD, remained fractional by comparison. Britain would not develop comparable iron smelting infrastructure until the 13th century AD,